With the announcement of Terminal Revenge, we have a clear date in which the new Ritual Beast support is gonna be released. With this in mind, we still have a product releasing between now and then, and also likely a ban list. With those things in consideration and taking a look into how the OCG format looks, let's take a look into how the July 2024 format could shape like and what to expect about a Ritual Beast deck. So to better talk about how the format will shape for July, I think it would be a good idea to do it in sort of like a tier list format. That way we can cover the decks and we can see more or less how the format will shape and what will be dominated decks when the new support is released. No? Now in this list I'm including mainly 3 things. 1, decks that could be affected by a ban list. 2, decks that they're gonna receive support in Legacy of Destruction, and 3, decks are gonna be receiving support in Battle of Legends, Terminal Revenge. That is when the new Ritual Beast support is gonna release. So first things first, let's speak about the decks that are currently dominant. So right now, the best deck in the format by far is the Fire decks. So it will be a Snake Eyes and the Fire King Snake Eye deck. With these decks, it's reasonable to expect that they're gonna be hit in a ban list between now and July. Now the question obviously is how hard they will be get hit and where they're gonna shape in the format after that, no? I feel personally it's safe to assume that these decks are gonna still be dominant, just that the power level is gonna be restricted a little bit lower. And I feel the hit is likely gonna be in cards that were released not this year but last year, probably the Wanted Angel, maybe the Abestals. But I personally feel the hit should be the Flamber Dragon, because I feel the issue with the deck right now is that if the deck has too much fuel, you can activate a hand trap and you expect them to set up a super board, but they still keep going and they keep going, and the Flambers allow for too much recursion, reviving 2 from the grave and putting the IP in the spell and trap zone. So with that in mind, I think we can expect this deck safely to remain dominant in the format. Now, apart from the Fire deck, the other deck that have been making the rounds is the Voiceless Voice deck. Now, these decks and the rest of the decks here I'm gonna be discussing, but we have to keep something very important in mind. That is that since we're in that tier 0 format, the decks are right now compared against their matchup, or are measured against how good they are in the matchup against the Fire deck. So, for example, Voiceless Voice is the second best deck right now after the Fire decks. But is that because they has a sort of decent matchup against the Fire deck? Is that because they has a good matchup right now that people are using up to 15, 18 hand traps in their decks? We don't know for certain, but I can certainly agree with the statement that I feel this deck is gonna still be dominant. And likely when the Fire decks get lower a little bit on power, the Voiceless Voice deck is gonna be there on top right next to them. And the next deck here is a deck that hasn't been released yet, and that is called Tenpai. And this deck in particular is very interesting because it aims to OTK the opponent in turn 2. So basically how the deck works is that they play upwards of around 18 to 22 hand traps, and they allow you to go ahead and with this many hand traps in the deck, they're able to stop the opponent, make them set up a super board, and then they have all these 1-card OTKs from their hands. Now, a deck that have been falling off a little bit in the OCG recently is the Branded deck. The Branded deck I definitely feel is a little bit below these 3. This 4, if we want to consider Fire King as a different deck. The Branded deck, the main thing that it has going for it, and this is the reason why it's kind of odd, no? That Branded now is stopping events in the TCG, when before, in December, the deck was looking pretty much the same, it wasn't topping, and the reason behind that is because it has a good Fire matchup. Now, with Branded having a good Fire matchup, that make a lot of room for stipulation here. Because if the Fire decks go down, if it lose popularity, decks that has really good matchup against the Fire decks are gonna probably be bumped down a little bit in their in the power. So that's why I feel it's probably safe to put Branded in the list below. Because I feel if with the fire decks don't being as prominent, since the fire deck has go down, it sounds crazy to say this way, will go down to 30% from 80% representation. Branded is gonna have less, branded players are gonna have less matches in events against the fire deck, and therefore are gonna be a little less successful, no? And the next deck we have here is a deck that is releasing, that has new support releasing in Terminal Revenge, and that will be the Ice Barrier deck. Now this deck has been having a little bit of tops here and there in the OCG, but it's definitely not a contender at the highest level. We put it in the top regionals. Maybe there will be one or two tops when WCQ season comes around, but I highly doubt it. I think this deck is definitely a tier below in power, and that's gonna be showcased when the deck finally, when the support is finally released when July comes around. Now, the next deck here is the Genex deck, and this deck is a deck that has a new Link 1, I believe, that allowed them to really ramp up on summons in the field, but it's one of those big combo piles that is able to have a one-card starter, but it's able to be stopped by hand traps. And I think the game right now, the way that we play Yu-Gi-Oh! Rewards a lot the ability to play through interruptions and the ability to play through hand traps, and I think this deck lacks that. I haven't seen a single top so far in the OCG, so I would say definitely this deck seems to be a tier below what we consider a regional topping deck. There might be some lists, maybe one or two tops, but definitely not gonna be something that's an often occurrence. No. Now the next deck here is the deck that is basically the synonym with Light of Destruction, and that would be Lightstorm. Lightstorm is getting some really good support in Light of Destruction, but the new support, at least from what I have seen in the OCG, doesn't seem to move the balance too much for this deck. We still see Lightstorm lists topping, but it's not represented enough to be considered a threat in the meta. I would say Lightstorm is one of those decks that could have one or two tops, but likely won't be climbing that much the ladder to be a top contender for July 2024 format. The next deck in here is very interesting to me because you remember how we were talking about the branded deck and how it has a good matchup against the fire deck. Well, the deck that kind of fell off the power list the most once the fire decks were released was Labyrinth. And Labyrinth is very interesting because I think the Labyrinth deck has a very bad matchup against the fire decks, but it's one of those decks that is always going to be lurking there a tier below that. I feel Labyrinth, once the fire decks go down in power a little bit, it's going to become more represented. It's going to be more represented. But as he stands, it's having a hard time competing in the current environment. So I feel this deck will probably be around here, has a few tops. I feel that once the fire deck gets knocked down a little bit by a ban list, now when new contenders come and start pushing at the higher level, the branded deck and the Labyrinth deck are gonna be right a little bit below those top contenders. Now the next deck we have here is the Flunderist deck. Now for Flunders is interesting because Flunders, the reason is performing right now as the best, I would say together with Kashtira, the best shifter deck, is because, well, the format is very well defined, no? We have a tier 0 deck. Now Flunders, as the tier 0 decks goes down a little bit and we have other decks that are less affected by shifter. We have Voiceless, we have Tempai, we have more diverse format. The shifter decks go down a little bit and I feel Flounder is gonna be one of those that will probably has a couple of stops. Probably a level in between this and this, depending on how hard the fire decks get hit and if the shifter decks are still able to perform, no? Now before we talk about these other decks, this gonna go hand in hand with the Kashtira deck. Kashtira deck, another shifter deck, I feel it's gonna be performing at the same level, and personally I like it more than the Flounder deck. I feel it has more versatility into more matchups, and I think that was showcased before we had the release of the fire decks. We noticed that the Kashtira deck was stopping with shifter, in multiple events, multiple regionals before the WCQs started this year. So it's gonna be interesting how this performs. I would say this probably can go here or can go a tier down. I'll probably more safely put in a few tops actually. So we have the Kashtira deck there. Now the next deck is the Sky Striker deck. Sky Striker seems to be getting some support in the Terminal Revenge booster set. Now this is a tricky part because Sky Strikers has been receiving support in the OCG, but is always, at least most of the time, is in the shape of promos. So how many promos are gonna be in Terminal Revenge, what the promos are gonna be is still unknown. Regardless of that, the Sky Striker deck haven't been performing in the OCG. So I will say it's safe to put it here in the top regionals, maybe a little bit higher than the Ice Barriers deck, but we will have to see what cards are released in order to know if it's gonna be this or it could be even a tier below that. Now the next deck here is a deck that is getting new support in Light of Destruction, and that is Melodious. Melodious are getting a new fusion and a new sort of like Shadow Fusion card that allows them to fuse from the deck. And the deck looks really good when you are playing it. It does lock you into Melodious, I believe. But apart from that, it's able to put a really good board. And it's a quite threatening deck when it goes first. Now, Melodious still is having a few tops here and there, but it's definitely not at the level to contend for the top spot of the format. I would say that it's probably gonna be somewhere in between a few tops and 1 or 2 tops. I actually feel that some of these decks are higher level than it, but it's still left to know if it's gonna go ahead and perform. Now the next deck we have here is Infernoids. Infernoids are getting a new fusion monster that is incredibly good, allowing the deck to go ahead and swarm way better, to mill way more cards. And obviously Infernoids always benefit of all the monsters being the crows, no? So with Infernoids, the part that's interesting is that it's gonna depend a lot on the format. And right now the deck is performing below the top standards of the format. So I feel safe to put Infernoids in 1 or 2 tops or a few tops, somewhere in between these two. We have to remember Inferno, as I mentioned before, is able to counter graveyard decks quite well. So you have to think if the fire decks on top, this is gonna be a little higher, but I feel that Inferno's decks are gonna be between these 3 tiers. In between, I'll probably put them between 1 or 2 tops or a few tops. Now the next one is the Jubel deck, and Jubel was already top in regionals before the new support was released, and Legacy of Destruction is bringing new support for Jubel, and then there is a new fusion that is a promo actually, so we don't know when we're gonna receive that one, so it's not gonna be considered for this Jubel deck list that we have. So it's gonna be interesting to see how Jubel perform. I personally am not expecting too much. I haven't heard much about the deck in the OCG, so we have to see how the deck perform in the OCG once the new fusion is released, in order to better dictate if the deck is gonna be able to perform once it has the newer support. Now the issue with that is that we have no idea when that's gonna be released. So I think it's safe to put Jubel in top in regionals and maybe a 1 or 2 tops, but it's gonna be a highly contested format between multiple decks, and I'm not sure it's the best thing for a Jubel deck. Now, Ashen is the big unknown here, because the Ashen deck has a 7 cards release, and as we know, we have 2 sets of 7 cards. We have 7 cards released in one product, and as TCG support goes, we have 7 more cards released in next product. Now, as you saw my live stream, or the bot of the live stream, I am very vested into the Ashen deck. Still don't have my bonfires, so I'm hoping, kind of copying a little bit, but I'm hoping the bonfire price goes down if the fire deck gets hit, and I'm able to pick up some more reasonable price than probably 80-90 bucks. So anyway, for that side, the Ashen deck looks very promising in the first 7 cards. And I think if they has a really good extra deck boss monster in the next 7 cards, it could really make wave in the format. Right now I'm gonna put it as unknown because we simply need to know, or the new cards needs to be revealed in order for us to know where this deck is gonna end up landing. Now, before we place the Ritual Beast deck in the tier list, I think it will be important to have a conversation about how the deck is performing in the OCG and why it's performing the way it is, because the change between the two formats and the way that the OCG is approaching the deck is very interesting to me. First thing I want to mention is that the Ritual Beast deck has a very interesting issue, and it's that it's a deck that is hard to pick up. It's a deck that demands a lot from the player, and it's a deck that you cannot just grab and begin having success with. It's a deck that you have to spend a lot of time practicing combos, and there's gonna be a huge difference between a Ritual Beast player that knows the combos, that knows how to interact with the opponent, how the matchup operates with the Voiceless Voice deck, Tenpai with the Fire decks, and a player that just pick up the deck. Because of this, the deck has very little representation in tournaments, and not only that, the representation it have is often very niche or very separate. For example, let's say there is 100 people in a tournament and 5 of them go with Ritual Beast decks. Maybe 3 of them just pick up the deck, and the other 2 are people that actually has experience with the deck. So the representation for the deck is very limited. And let me show you a graph for that. So this is a breakdown of the representation by deck for a tournament in February for the OCG. As you can see, you have your Fire Kings, you have your Poised Boys, Branded, Flu, and there is other decks divided here. But you do not see a Ritual Beast. That's because the representation is 2 or lower. So they're represented by this group of other decks, no? But when it comes to breakdown for the event, you have here one Ritual Beast player. And this Ritual Beast player actually was the one that won the event. And this is something that's gonna happen with Ritual Beast, and it's something that is happened back in 2016 when the cards were released. Because the deck demands a lot from the player and demand you to focus a lot on learning how to play it and just be learning combos and spend a lot of time with the deck. Less people is gonna pick it up. And because of that, the deck is gonna have less representation. Less representation translate, even when you have a good conversion rate to top cut, it translates into less tops, no? But something that's very interesting to counter this for us in the TCG is that this is releasing in Battle of Legends Terminal Revenge. And that's very important, because right now, a stereotypical Ritual Beast deck list in the OCG looks something like this. And I find this interesting because if we think about the cards that could be a lot of money here, if we think about the cards that could be expensive here, right now, obviously, of the cards that are released in the TCG, and you know, some of these cards are gonna change because of format. Obviously, we don't have Maxi and so on, no? But the cards are released in the TCG, the only one that we can consider is very expensive is SP, no? Now, there's some cards that could be potentially expensive because they're gonna be released as new support, and that will be Lara, Inheritance, Ulti Noche Dragon, and Ulti Rey Rautari. Now, for those 4 cards, they're gonna be released in Battle of Legends Terminal Revenge, no? Now, Battle of Legends Terminal Revenge is a set that, just scroll all the way down, gonna be 5 cards, 4 ultras, and 1 secret. What this means is that the cards are gonna likely not be that expensive. It's not the same as having a secret in a main set, like it was the case for something like SP Little Knight, no? Now, the interesting thing with all this is that this is exactly the same way that the deck was originally released in the Secret Forces. Go to the Secret Forces, there were 4 supers and 1 secret. Same deal. So, the deck is not gonna be that expensive. So we're gonna have this really cool case in which the people that want to afford the deck is able to afford it, and the people that put time into the deck are gonna be the ones that are gonna succeed. So you're eliminating the money barrier that right now is plaguing the TCG format from the equation, for this deck, and obviously it's just speculation. They could short print all the Ritual Beast cards and then we're all screwed. But given that they don't short print them, hopefully the deck is not gonna be that pricey, and hopefully that's gonna help a lot with the representation of the deck and help make these pie charts look a little bit better, no? Now, another thing I want to mention before that, before we place the deck in the tier list, is that apart from representation, the deck has a very bad environment right now in the OCG. What I mean with that is that the OCG obviously has the biggest difference between the OCG and the TCG is Maxi, no? And the Ritual Beast deck has a very interesting interaction with Maxi, because one is the opponent activate Maxi, it basically ends your turn. You simply cannot play around it. You don't have Kalba, you don't have a crossout. You have to stop your turn there, because the Ritual Beast deck, is popular for summoning a lot. You won't be able to set up even a single steed without going through 2 or 3 summons. And a steed at that moment is not gonna call it. So that's something very interesting that the deck have, and not only that, the deck doesn't play good with Maxi, and the reason behind that is that the Ritual Beast deck is not a deck that plays a lot of standards or has a lot of standards available to it. You basically have your normal summon, that's your most important resource. Then you will have the effect of something like Elder, and then if you get a stop, or if you have, in this case, if you're going first, or you're going second after Maxi, the rest of the cards you have in hand, at most you can use one as an extender. If you have something like Emergency Teleport, you might be able to summon a monster from the deck that help you further your combo. But apart from Emergency Teleport, apart from extra copies of Rampengo and Kanaha in hand, the deck doesn't really have a lot of cards that you can draw and just simply continue playing, no? So the deck plays bad with Maxi and plays horribly against Maxi. So I think that's something that's very interesting to consider once we look at these Ritual Beast decks. Now, the other thing to consider with all this is that the format is right now very hostile in the OCG. And what I mean with that is that earlier we were looking at this Tempai deck. You see this thing has 22 hand traps, and you're trying to play a combo deck against it. So this is basically a very bad matchup, Obviously, Tempai decks also come with some caveats with all this. They have to draw the cards allowed to play, no? But with that in mind, if you're playing a format that people are main decking 20 plus hand traps, you're gonna have a hard time as a combo deck. So taking this consideration, taking in consideration the changes of Maxi, taking in consideration the different hand traps, and also if you wanna look at the list I put out for the deck. For the TCG, and this was one of the lists I have been working on. We are, at least I was thinking, of main decking 3 post Prosperity, and right now it's at 1 in the OCG. We're thinking of main decking 3 Emergency Teleport, right now it's at 2. We're thinking of main decking 3 Shifters, right now it's at 2 in the OCG. So it's gonna be interesting because the formats are quite a bit different, especially in the perspective of a deck that tries to win by performing a long combo, no? So with all these things in mind, the deck is right now positioned in a way that is around, I would say, the 4th or 5th best deck in the OCG. And right now, what I mentioned earlier, there was I believe 1,200 people tournament. The deck was 4 in the tournament. And by the way, one thing I want to mention before moving further is I'm gonna include this link in the description below. But I thought it was pretty cool. The guy that topped with the Ritual Beast deck actually got a long interview here, and it's something that you can go ahead and translate. I'm gonna put the link below in the doobly-doo. And it's really cool. He mentioned how he got over the tournament. He mentioned how some of his decisions pan out. He mentioned, I find it interesting, he mentioned out here, for example, that he played Underworld Goddess, but instead of Underworld Goddess, he thinks he should have main deck Appaloosa, for example. And you can see his side deck, and he started explaining everything that he played, no? So if you guys want to take a look at that, just the link will be in the description below. Now, with this list in mind and with all the stuff we have talked about, how does the Ritual Beast deck pan out in this format? And I would say for sure the Ritual Beast deck is gonna very likely be between the dominant stakes for events. The reason behind this is that I noticed that the fire decks right now is very highly represented, and I feel I hope at least, that the TCG is gonna be a little more proactive about hitting the fire decks in a timely manner. So with the fire decks going down in power a little bit, all the other decks get more powerful, no? Now with the fire decks going down a little bit, a lot of decks will try to have a different approach to combat decks going first, no? This might translate to less hand traps in the main deck. This might translate to start using ball breakers. And the environment could be better for the Ritual Beast deck. We have to remember that Ritual Beast deck also the main form of destructions he have, the main form of interruptions. Apart from banishing that you can do with some interruptions like SP and ulti-cannahawk, is with the Steed. And Steed has the word destroy on it, which is not that good right now against the fire matchup. So with all these things in mind, I feel the Ritual Beast deck is gonna be one of the main contenders once July comes around, and I feel the deck is gonna really reward players that take the time to go ahead and learn the combos and learn the matchup and start using the deck at its maximum potential. Now, what I will do personally, what I'm thinking, is that during the coming weeks, I'm gonna be practicing a lot the deck. I'm gonna be making a lot of videos of matchups of the deck. I'm gonna be having live streams on my Twitch channel. And I'm gonna be practicing not only Ritual Beast decks, but also these other 3 decks in here, if you wanna consider the fire deck a single one. I'm gonna be practicing some of the Tempai deck, I'm gonna be practicing Voiceless, I'm gonna be practicing the fire deck, all in preparation from when the July 2024 format comes around. Now with all this in mind, I just want to thank you for watching, and I would really love to have your opinion in the description. Now with all this in mind, I really want to thank you for watching. I would love to have your opinion in the description. Now with all this in mind, I would love to hear your opinion about this, and I would love to. Now with all this in mind, I would love if you leave your. Now with all this in mind, I would love to read your comments below about what you think the format is gonna look like. What decks maybe I'm missing here that might be contenders? What decks do you think are gonna perform better or worse than what I represented in this list? Also, if there is a specific card you wanna mention that might be key part of this format, might define this environment, let me know in the comments below. With all this in mind, I wanna thank you again for watching, and I'll be live likely this Sunday with another live stream, and I'm gonna be live quite often. If you wanna subscribe to my Twitch channel, that's twitch.tv/8YGO channel. And if you wanna keep an eye out for more Ritual Beast content, for those practice videos, for matchup against other decks, and an updated deck list, you can go ahead and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next video. And an updated list of an updated deck